This afternoon, MPs will debate assisted dying, following a public petition calling for the government to bring forward laws to legalise helping people end their lives in certain circumstances. Conservative MP Andrew Mitchell was against it when he entered the House of Commons in 1987, but since then he's had a change of heart. He's now chair of the cross-party group Choice at the End of Life. And I'm pleased to be joined now by Andrew Mitchell himself. Welcome to the show, Andrew. I hope you won't mind that before we get into the very important subject that is this assisted dying debate, of course, Westminster has been really under pressure from all of these allegations about many members of Parliament, most prominently, of course, in recent days, Christopher Pincher. Did the Prime Minister move too slowly to withdraw the whip from him?
Well, good afternoon, Tom. And you asked me to come on the programme to talk about assisted dying, and that's really what I want to talk about. But in respect of your question, the point I would want to make out to your listeners is I think the vast majority of members of Parliament behave entirely properly. They work very hard for their constituents, regardless of which party they are. And most of them do a very good job. And I wouldn't want all this talk that's going around at the moment to colour the perception of members of Parliament as a whole.
Well, I suppose we will wait to see what the multiple investigations turn out to say. Moving on to assisted dying, of course, you've been on a journey yourself on this issue. What was the moment when you decided to have that change of heart? What changed your mind from being against it in terms of becoming in favour of assisted dying?
Well, I was always against it, and I thought it was humans interfering in the natural order of things and, if you like, playing God. But over the years, I have completely changed my mind, mostly from listening to the experiences of my constituents who've come to see me in my advice sessions and have told me about the awful experience at the end of life of people they loved, perhaps their husband or their son, indeed, in some cases. And I've sort of cried with them at these appalling stories. And I've concluded that this act of choice that my constituents want at the end of life is one I would want for myself and those people whom I love. And, you know, I think in Britain it will be the next big social reform. All the polling shows that 87% of our constituents want to have this choice at the end of their life with very, very strict safeguards. What we want to see does not go far enough for some of our supporters, but we want people basically to be able to exercise this choice at the end of life if they are within 6 months of the time that they will die, if they are terminally ill, if they are frightened of dying in pain or in great indignity. We think they should have this choice that they and their families can make together. And that's why so many people have signed this petition and why we're going to be debating it in the House of Commons this afternoon.
Intellectually, it does seem that this is a rational thing to do, that this is an individualist thing to do, that this is something that respects personal and individual autonomy and sovereignty. Although people are concerned about the limits that are drawn, about the pressure that people may feel may be placed under by their families, or indeed whether or not that diagnosis, that sort of termination date that is set, is really accurate. How would these safeguards work in practice?
Well, already in social security law, there is a way of deciding whether or not someone is within 6 months of the end of their life. But in what we are proposing, the safeguard would be that there would be 2 doctors who would make clear that it was the individual's decision and also that they are within 6 months of the end of their life. And in terms of whether or not they could be pressured, which of course is a legitimate concern, our proposals would see a High Court judge looking at every single end-of-life application in this way. So we've sought very directly to confront both those 2 criticisms. And let me be clear, Tom, I don't criticise those who take a different view. I don't think they're bad or evil. People can reach these conclusions for themselves in their own way. And having talked to many of my colleagues, I know how hard they are thinking about the case for and the case against. But what I can tell you is that over the last 2.5 years since the general election, something like 100 colleagues have come to our side of the argument. And that's why I say I do think it will be the next big reform to come, the big social reform that we make in this country, just as they're making it in so many other countries, in so many states in the USA, in Australia, in New Zealand, where there was a referendum last year. 66% of all those who voted said this was the right change to make. And it's being discussed in Scotland. I think it will be debated very soon there and probably implemented. Jersey, the Isle of Man. These are all parts of the Anglo zone, if you like, where social opinion and comment on the law is moving in this direction.
And yet the debate today in Parliament is clearly a milestone along this journey, but won't necessarily change the law in terms of how the United Kingdom regulates assisted dying. The government would need to come on board with your proposals. Have you had discussions with ministers? Have you heard many positive soundings in this direction from the government?
Well, you're quite right that the debate on the petition today is an opportunity for members of Parliament to express their views on behalf of their constituents, both for and against. That is correct. And in a way, until we have a bill before the House of Commons, probably a private member's bill, the status quo is not going to change. And the government obviously needs to be careful because the government is neutral. When a minister speaks about this, they take off their ministerial hat and put on their hat as a member of Parliament representing their constituents. So the government has no view on this. The government says quite rightly it's for members of Parliament and for Parliament to make up their mind. But there is, of course, a slight danger that in this situation, if time isn't given on the floor of the House so that the House of Commons can exercise its view, the government inevitably becomes on the side of the status quo and not on the side of change. And I think that is an issue for the government to reflect on, but not at the moment because there is no bill. But that could well be the case quite soon now.
Well, really interesting note to end on there, Andrew Mitchell. Thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this afternoon. A really fascinating issue that will no doubt become bigger and bigger as time goes on.